So, as we were discussing individual differences, it's important that we take a step back and understand how we perceive things and what influences the way that we perceive things. Remember, as I said in the previous lecture tidbit, that what I consider to be rational or logical may be different than what you consider to be rational or logical. Part of the challenge is that the experiences I have influence the way that I see the world, and they're different than the experiences that you have and the way that you've seen the world. And so these differences impact the way that I perceive something relative to the way you perceive something. So it is important that we recognize the perceptual process and how that can influence us and the bias or unconscious bias that we may have as we are navigating and making sense of the world. So let's start with what the perceptual process looks like. And the perceptual process is how we notice and make sense of information coming at us. We gather information from the moment we're born, where we absorb information, what our experiences are, what we see. We may not remember them, but our brain remembers them and they're locked into our brain. We may not be able to pull them up into short-term memory, but they are stored in our long-term memory. So our brain is always looking to make sense, to find the path of least resistance, if you will, to simplify things as much as it can in order to be able to make sense of it. And so when it comes to perception, what I perceive and what you perceive may be very, very different because it's based on my lifetime of experiences. I can even go back to a point where, you can see children born in the same family have very different experiences and very different perceptions of events and things. I have triplet nieces and nephews, and they're all incredibly different people. And part of it is obviously that they are as individual people, but part of it comes from the fact that they had different teachers, different friends, different experiences, different interests. And even though they all grew up in the same family, came from the same womb at basically the same time, they all experience the world differently. One has a PhD in applied physics. The other one is a vet. The other one is a creative artist. And they all are, very different in the way that they see things. So if you can imagine triplets from one family being incredibly different, you can understand how all of us might see the world with very different eyes. How does our brain do this? Well, there are different things that get our attention. We'll talk about that on the next slide. What gets our attention? But certain things get our attention. It draws our eye to it. We absorb it. We gather that in, and it makes us pay attention to it, whatever that is. Then as we're gathering this information, we have to organize it in a way that makes some degree of sense. And so I might put it in little boxes in my brain, metaphorically speaking, where I'm going to put stuff in this box, and this box, and this box, and this box. Then I'm going to interpret that information. So I'm starting to now make sense of what it is that I have absorbed and I've collected from the environment and trying to understand it and interpret it. So I have to put it in a place where it's easily retrievable. I have to make associations with other things that are in the past that I've learned and experienced to see if those associations make sense. So I'm interpreting it based on what I'm retrieving from my past and from other experiences. And then ultimately, I'm going to try to figure out which box these things goes into and then tie up that beautiful little box in a little bow. And that's the judgment that I make. And at any step in the process, you can see in that side, at the bottom of the graphic there is feedback. There's a constant feedback loop. So if I'm making a judgment, and then I'm going to assess whether or not that was an appropriate judgment. Does it change the way I think about what should get my attention? Does it change the way I organize things? Will it change the way I reinterpret things? Will it change the way I retrieve and make associations? Will it change the judgments I make at the end of the day? And it's a constant feedback loop and a constant process. We learn that way. Can we change our perceptions? 100%. Absolutely. We can absolutely change our perceptions. We can change the way we think about things because all we have to do is recognize that our brain is biasing us to think about things in a certain way. We can gain new information that might change the perspective and the point of view and the interpretation that we made. We can reorganize it in a way that makes better sense. There's all sorts of things that we can do around that. So that perceptual process is the way that every piece of information that our brain takes in is managed and sorted and organized and interpreted in our brains. What influences the perception that we experience? Number one is our own experiences, our individual differences, our different personality characteristics, the different experiences that we've had over our life. All of these things influence the lens with which we use to see and understand and make sense of the world. Then there's the characteristics of the stimulus. There's the intensity of the stimulus, the contrast of the stimulus, the frequency of the stimulus, the novelty of it. If it's unique and different, is it large versus small? Is it in motion or is it not moving? And then we've all heard of the old wives' tale that red sports cars get more tickets. Why? And it's not because they're going faster, it's because they stand out. They contrast and they have an intense color. And other color cars speed, or drivers in those cars speed all the time, but the red car is easy to remember. The red car stands out. The red car is more likely to be pulled over because in a field of black and white and gray cars, the red car stands out. So we are more likely to be able to remember and pull over the red car to give them the ticket for the speeding. So there's all sorts of stimulus. We know that repetitive noises, repetitive sounds, repetitive words make a difference. Novel things stand out. Large things in contrast to small things in contrast to large. But even something as simple as, who do we decide who would be a good leader? We know historically, if you look at the data, CEOs and presidents of the United States tend to be over 6 foot tall because we believe tall means leaderly. I don't know why we believe that, but that is the perception that we have. And we can look at the data and we know most leaders, most CEOs are over 6 foot tall. Most leaders are over 6 foot tall. This is a consistent process and a consistent issue. And then we have the characteristics of the situation. And in a situation, there are all sorts of factors that can prime us to think in a certain way and frame the way that we think about things. Let's say that I watched a movie last night on, um, uh, I don't know, Watson and Crick and the double helix, right? Of DNA. So I might look at something, it might remind me of that video that I watched or that documentary that I watched the night before. So something that was recent can absolutely have an impact on the way that I perceive a situation. Or it could be based on a really profound past experience, like a far past experience that was so deep and so profound that no matter what, everything I do is seen through that lens. It could be a trauma, it could be anything. It could be an exciting event and a good thing, but it's the lens that I use anytime I want to see something. And then we have things like scripts and schemas. Scripts and schemas are the way that we set up a pattern of behaviors and a script in which we behave based on a certain stimulus. And that comes from perceptions, right? When we know that if I do A, B happens, and if I do C, D happens, so I'm going to proceed A, B, C, D, and I'm going to work through the script of the schema in that predictable manner. But all of these things influence our perception and have an impact on the way that we see the world. What will get my attention could depend on the situation, and it could depend on my individual differences and experiences, but all of these things combined work together. So we've used the term individual differences a few times. What are individual differences? And it's pretty straightforward. What makes us individuals? what differentiates us from other people. And it has to do with a whole host of different things and the mix of those things. What are my abilities? What are my personality characteristics? What attitudes do I bring to the table? What are things that I value? How do I learn? What is my preferred learning style? All of these things are the characteristics that vary from one person to another. And it's through these things that we perceive the world and we interpret the world. So you can imagine, right, if we're varying on these 5 different major categories, and within each of these more subtle subcategories of different types of abilities, different types of personality constructs, different attitudes that we have, how that impacts the different ways that you and I might perceive the same set of events. I might see it one way, you see it an entirely different way. So let's start with abilities. There are 3 different types of abilities that we pay attention to more often than not. One is cognitive ability, what is our capacity to understand, to interpret, to engage in cognition or thinking about something, analyzing, etc. Then there's physical ability, our ability to lift weight, to run, to walk, to have fine motor skills. And then psychomotor is how I perceive the world, and then I react to and adapt to what I'm perceiving. So a psychomotor test might be something where a police officer walks into a training session and they're looking at a scenario and they have to make decisions in a split second. Do I shoot or do I take a step back? Do I go after a bad guy, or is that really a good guy? Or is that person that I think is a good guy really a bad guy? And then I can shoot them, right, in the scenario. And the whole point of psychomotor skills is how do we train people to think about something and then react to that thing in a way that makes sense. And so individual abilities vary from person to person, and some people have good, strong physical abilities and psychomotor abilities, and other people don't. Some people are more gifted on the cognitive end of things, but everybody has a different ability that they bring to the table. Then we have personality characteristics. The most common personality characteristic you'll hear people talking about is what we call the Big Five. The acronym for this is OCEAN. It's openness to new experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and then they call it emotional stability. Other people call it neuroticism, hence the N in OCEAN. Regardless of what you want to call it, emotional stability and neuroticism are just 2 separate ends of the same continuum. I'm either emotionally stable on one extreme or neurotic on the other extreme. These are all getting at um, personality characteristics that influence our ability to work and to perform on the job. And we know that openness to experience is a great predictor. Conscientiousness is the single best predictor. Good conscientious workers are good performers. Extroversion versus introversion. Introversion can be fine for a job. Certain jobs require you to be more extroverted. For example, a sales job. It's hard to be an introvert and be a good sales rep. Can you do it? Of course. But by and large, extroverted people do a much better job of selling and that more extroverted process than an introvert does. And so extroversion, introversion can be used to predict what type of personality introverted versus extroverted will do well on a particular job. Agreeableness and how agreeable you are doesn't really do a good job of predicting our ability to do a job, because I can be agreeable today and not so agreeable tomorrow. It adapts regularly based on our moods, and so we want to recognize that agreeableness, while generally I might be an agreeable person, most of the time when we're measuring agreeableness, it's how I'm feeling in the moment, not how I feel broadly and generally. And emotional stability also, we want to have people who are emotionally stable, and that can do a pretty good job of predicting as well. Openness to new experience, people who are open to new ideas and new ways of thinking about things, these can also be good predictors of performance. So Big Five is a big one. Then we have locus of control and whether or not I believe I determine, or I feel like I have control over my life or myself, or whether I am at the mercy of the world and mercy of external factors. High internal locus of control is usually associated with high levels of confidence in our ability to get things done, self-efficacy, and things like that. And external locus of control, meaning I feel like I just don't have control over my life, tends to be people who are more can go with the flow. They adapt as they need to, and they kind of they don't they respond to the external environment rather than trying to manage their external environment. Excuse me. Authoritarianism is the belief in obedience to authority, the legitimacy of power differences. People who have a more authoritarian style tend to have more what we call conventional values. They believe that that power differences matter, that people should adhere to rules and laws and authorities, and those who have authority are in control. Those who don't have authority must obey. And again, it depending on what kind of culture you're in, a more democratic style, a more democratic process tends to be a better way of managing your organization. Authoritarian styles in the workplace tend to not work very well. Self-monitoring is my ability to present the image that I think people want to see in a given situation. If I'm a high self-monitor, I am very adaptable in the way that I want people to perceive me. If I'm a low self-monitor, I don't care. I'm less likely to care what other people say about me. I'm going to be very consistent in my approach and my ways of doing things. My approval motivation, do I need to have external approval? And am I presenting myself in a way that's going to elicit approval from people? And achievement motivation, where I am very competitive, I am achievement oriented. And achievement oriented isn't always just about competing against somebody else. Achievement can be internal, right? I have a high achievement excuse me, I have a high achievement motivation myself, but my orientation is about competing against myself, not necessarily competing against others. So I am always looking to improve myself. So my achievement motivation is how do I improve myself? I couldn't care less what other people have to say about me. I care only about what I think about is good for me. And am I achieving what I want to achieve for myself? So these are there's hundreds of more personality constructs, but these are the big six, the ones that we're more likely to see in organizations, the ones that are more likely to have an impact in the organization, and we want to stay focused on those and recognizing again, all of these personality constructs that we're talking about influence perception and influence the way that we understand a situation and are able to make good decisions. Workplace attitudes are a combination of cognition, affect, and behavior. As such, cognition is the way I think about things, affect is how it makes me feel, and behavior is the behavior that I exhibit, that it's observable to others. And all of these things influence an attitude that I might have. And when cognition and affect and behavior are in alignment, obviously people can understand what my attitude is about something. Can people's attitudes change? Absolutely. I can change the way I think about things. I can change the way it makes me feel. I can make peace with something that makes me uncomfortable, and then I can become more comfortable with the negative feelings that it has in me. I can change the way I behave based on the way I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. Yes, attitudes can change. People change their attitudes all the time, as people engage in diversity training and people engage in all sorts of different learning opportunities. We can learn and grow and change, and our attitudes can change. Some workplace attitudes of note are things like cognitive dissonance. When there's an inconsistency between the behaviors and my attitudes, I might have an attitude, but I might about a certain thing, but I behave in a certain way, and when they're not in alignment with each other, that can create cognitive dissonance for me, that I'm expected to behave one way when I believe something entirely different. Now, for example, your organization might ask you to do something that you're not comfortable with. So you have to engage in that behavior, but it is not consistent with your own values and the way that you like to think and feel about things. And so that inconsistency can be a real problem for people. job satisfaction, work satisfaction, task satisfaction, all the different quote unquote satisfactions are parts of attitudes. And we want to focus on good attitudes and how these attitudes can influence our behaviors on the job and influence the decisions that we're going to make. And then we have issues of organizational commitment, the normative commitment, what I should be doing or what I ought to do in order to do my job well. Affect commitment, meaning how I feel about it. I want to do this. And continuance commitment, where I do it because I need to do it. I don't have a choice. And so continuance commitment, for example, is someone who, I'm going to do this job no matter what. I don't like my job, but I need this job and I need the paycheck. So I'm just going to do the bare minimum that it takes to get the job done. So that's continuance commitment. I need to do this job. I don't have a choice. Affect commitment is I want to do this. I really love what I do, and I want to be able to continue to do that. And then normative commitment is what I should be doing according to the norms and the culture of the organization. And I can have affective commitment, and I might not have normative commitment. I might want to do certain things, excited about doing certain things, but I don't want to follow the norms of the organization. I'm uncomfortable with the norms of the organization, sort of thing. And all three of these aspects of commitment influence the way that we make decisions. If it's continuance commitment, then I'm not going to be as willing to take risks, and I'm not going to go all out and engage in extra behaviors that are going to help the organization. I'm far more likely to just do the bare minimum. And so my decisions will be influenced by that. And the same thing with affective commitment. If I'm excited and I want to do something, I am far more likely to make decisions that will reinforce that. And the same thing with normative commitment. If I really have a sense of loyalty to doing what the norm is, what should be done, or what ought to be done, then it's a very different motivation than someone who's like, I'm doing the bare minimum and that's all I care about. All these attitudes can have an impact on things like counterproductive work behaviors, where we're engaging in sabotage, or we might be engaging in political behaviors that are going to influence the dynamics of an organization and perhaps stall the ability of the organization to make progress towards its goals. It might have an influence on workplace violence and workplace behaviors, whether it's bullying that goes on in the workplace, or whether it's cyberbullying or any number of different things that can happen. Workplace violence is still a real thing, and organizations have to work hard to protect their employees from workplace violence. Then we have withdrawal behaviors, which can be both physical and psychological withdrawal. Physical withdrawal means I'm absent. I just decide to call in sick at work even though I'm not sick. So I'm physically withdrawing. I'm not engaging in the workplace. Then I can be engaged in psychological withdrawal, where I show up to work, but I'm so bored that all I'm doing is playing computer games. I'm not interested in doing the work that I need to do. I'm showing up. I'm doing the bare minimum to keep my paycheck, but I'm more engaged in withdrawal. And then organizational citizenship behaviors, which are behaviors that encourage me to go above and beyond the call of duty, to do more, and to engage in things that will benefit the organization. And so if I'm feeling like I've got affective commitment in my workplace and that I have a good attitude and good job satisfaction, I'm far more likely to engage in citizenship behaviors. So that's going to influence the decisions that I make. If I'm not feeling affectively committed or satisfied with my job, the decision to do certain things is going to be different. I am less likely to decide to work extra hours, to do overtime, to do the things asked of me above and beyond. Values are beliefs that are stable, they are related to what I consider to be important, and they are one of the prime things that influence people's behaviors. So for me, I value certain things, and I might engage in certain behaviors and make decisions based on those things that I value. For example, I believe in good corporate social responsibility and environmental stewardship, so I am more likely to make purchases with companies that engage in that type of CSR or corporate social responsibility. I'm far more likely to reward companies and people who engage in those behaviors, that make sure that our environment is clean and they're doing the right thing to help people in the community. So that's a decision I'm going to make for my investment. Where am I going to put my money? Where am I going to make my purchases? That is going to be an influence. If I think about this from the perspective of the organization, the organization's values are reflected in its company culture. So the company is going to be making decisions based on what the company values, or should be making a decision based on what the company values. Now, there are two types of values. There's terminal values and instrumental values. Instrumental values are the means to an end. So we value things like competence, courageousness, obedience, respect, independence, self-reliance. These are things that we need in order to accomplish outcomes. We need courageousness. We need obedience. Terminal values are the values that we want in and of itself. I want happiness. I want equality. I want freedom. I want friendship. I want self-respect, wisdom, pleasure, social respect, etc., etc. So instrumental values are the way that we get an outcome that we want. And so we value a certain skill set to get an outcome. And the terminal value is the thing I value in and of itself. It's the end itself that I want. I want happiness. Beg your pardon. The impact of value differences is huge when it comes to conflict and the way that we make decisions and ethics and corporate social responsibility. So when I have value differences, we're going to be more likely to have a conflict. So I might value one thing, you value something entirely different. And until we figure out where we have our common ground, it's going to be very difficult for us to resolve our conflict. If I'm going to be making a decision, I'm going to make it based on my values, whether it's a decision about how I want to go about navigating a problem in my workplace or a decision about where I want to invest my money. I'm going to make it based on what I value. And then ethics and corporate social responsibility all come down to values and where people's values are. We will get into that as we get into the fourth module, where we talk a lot more about ethics and ethical values. Lastly is our learning style. It is absolutely linked to personality and ability. It's our aptitude. It's the natural ability that we have to learn and understand things. It's the way we take in information. Do we take in information in more a visual way, an auditory way? Are we a read-write focused person, or are we more kinesthetic or experiential? One way you can learn about your own learning style is go to varklearn.com. You can see that link there. You can go there and you can explore the dominant way that you take in information. And that can influence your ability to make certain decisions. Because if I'm taking information in kinesthetically, I'm going to make a decision based on what my experiences are. If I'm taking it in via read-write, I'll make a decision based on what I've read and how I've experienced things. It has an impact on the way that we communicate. Kinesthetic people, are more likely to talk about their experiences. And you'll hear that in my lectures, where I spend a lot of time talking about stories and what my experiences are, and it brings those stories and experiences to life. So I tend to use experiential examples and kinesthetic learning in order to share and help people to learn things. But I recognize that's not the only way people learn. Then we have, the impact that it has on motivation, because if I am a visual person and I'm not able to make a decision because I don't have the right visual stimuli, this can be a problem for me. It can impact my ability to be motivated. And so it is important to listen to people when they tell you how they want to take in information. You might have a boss that wants to have a quick summary. They don't want all the detailed research. And for you analytical decision makers, that's going to make your head spin. But what you should do is provide a quick summary of what you found and what your recommendation is, but make sure you've got the backup information. If that person wants to read the backup information, it's available to them. But you provide them with the summary, they understand the summary, they can then make their decision and kind of move on from there. If you are the kind of person that is more creative or conceptual, then we need to have more creative idea, more information in there, and we need to have more examples in order for me to be able to understand and creatively, manage things. Sometimes people don't want to read anything at all, and they just want you to tell them what the bottom line is very quickly in an auditory manner. So learning style really varies from person to person and can have a tremendous impact on an individual's ability to make decisions.